how serious is the issue of corruption and how can we link it up with issues of organized crimes?
Well, I think corruption is a challenge that every country in the world faces. And organized criminals know this, and therefore they're using corruption to facilitate all aspects of their crime, to make it easier to pass borders, to make it harder to get caught. I think in terms of the response, it's important when you're looking at fighting organized crime to also consider how you're going to fight corruption that's facilitating the organized crime. And that can be the steps you can take to try to strengthen the integrity in your law enforcement institutions and judicial integrity. And then also when corruption does occur, to make sure that you're detecting and you're also investigating and prosecuting that corruption.
And what kind of efforts can we employ to deal with transnational crimes?
Transnational organized crime affects countries across the world. And therefore, it's important to try to have countries work together to be able to combat it. And so if we're going to tackle the problem, then we have to be able to do it in a way where these countries are working together. So you have the source and the transit and destination countries working together to be able to combat the problem.
Looking at Africa, of course, corruption affects like all countries in the world. But looking at Africa, what kind of challenges are we facing in tackling transnational crimes?
Well, I think Africa is often, exploited by sophisticated organized criminal groups who see some of the weaknesses that might exist, in rule of law in the country and in the continents. And they try to use that then to be able to carry out their activities in a way that they hope will minimize the chances of getting caught. And so, like all regions, it's important in Africa that efforts are made to strengthen law enforcement, strengthen the capacities of prosecution and the judiciary to tackle what are very complicated and complex crimes. And then to be able also to cooperate both within other countries within Africa and then with other parts of the world.
We've seen efforts to link transnational crimes to the international crimes. I mean, don't you think doing this we are likely to lose focus on the simple crimes that, for example, you could easily investigate and prosecute?
Well, I think both types of crime really reflect serious crimes, that have a large impact. And I think there has been a tendency in the past to think of them as completely separate. So if you're looking at international crimes like war crimes and crimes against humanity, little attention was paid to the fact that they may have been exploiting blood diamonds as a way of financing, buying the guns that are needed, or letting drugs or whatever flow through the country in order to be able to finance. So I think actually it makes sense to try to look at what's happening holistically. It gives you a broader range of tools in terms of law enforcement and prosecution and international cooperation that you can use to then combat the crimes.
So do you think there's really political will to deal with both transnational and international crimes?
I mean, I guess the short answer is I think in any country more can always be done, and it's often a question of resources, of law enforcement and prosecution that are overburdened with a lot of different types of crime that they're trying to tackle. So I think there's always more that can be done. Certainly having the political will and, in recognizing that that's important, in giving the resources that are necessary to law enforcement, to the prosecution and the criminal justice system as a whole certainly helps that. And I think the threat that I think once countries realize the threat that these activities are posing in their economies, in their development, then I think that's enough attention can be paid to be able to combat both of these crimes.
And I would like to know what is UNODC doing to help, demand for accountability, and not just UNODC, but what can other organizations do to contribute to demanding accountability?
Mm-hmm. I think lots of parts of society have a role in that. So certainly, it's recognized under the UN Convention Against Corruption, the importance of accountability and integrity and transparency in your public service, in the judiciary and in the prosecution. And I think that countries are recognizing this as well. Now, what can be done more? I think you do see often different actors that are calling for this within the governments themselves, which realize the importance of that. Also in civil society, stories where media and journalists have done a great, job of uncovering some of facts, that also helps. And I think increasingly we see it with youth. And so you see the next generation that want things to change, you know, and want to see their better development and better security in their countries.
Thank you so much. That's the end of it.
Thank you very much.